Well, Alison is here with the papers. She's starting with reaction to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and his speech to the UN Security Council. Alison.
Yeah, Zelensky's video address is on many of the front pages today, including in Russia. And we can actually start with the Russian paper Kommersant. The paper notes that Zelensky accused Russia of war crimes and called to reform the UN Security Council to prevent Russia from blocking decisions. Now, Kommersant writes that what happened in Bucha remains in the spotlight internationally, although the paper isn't very clear about what they think about what happened. They just say that Western media published photos accusing Russia of killing civilians, but that they note very heavily that Russia denies the accusations as fake news meant to distract from negotiations over Ukraine. Meanwhile, though, Western papers are having a very strong reaction to Zelensky's testimony, notably the graphic video he showed of burned bodies and mass graves. A French paper, Aujourd'hui en France, calls it the video that shook the UN. Another French paper, Libération, publishes a somewhat graphic image of their own on their front page today, the face of a dead man, partially buried. We decided to blur it. Their headline is a quote from Zelensky's speech. He said, "The UN is giving Russia the right to sow death."
You found, haven't you, some papers echoing Volodymyr Zelensky's call to reform the UN, get rid of Russia's veto power.
Yeah, the right to veto is preventing the UN from fulfilling its mission to preserve peace. That's according to French magazine L'Obs. They ask who is ready to get rid of that veto power. And according to them, the resistance would really be coming from three permanent Security Council members, Russia, China, and the US. The magazine is pretty hopeless that they'll ever agree to give up their veto power, particularly in this climate of new Cold War. But the magazine says that it is a battle that has to be fought if we want to prevent the world from turning into a jungle.
Let's move to something else. We're going to turn away from Ukraine to the latest on the campaign trail here in France. Papers are reporting on how the death of a Jewish man back in February has been really thrust into the spotlight. This is by one of the far-right candidates.
Yeah, English-speaking audiences can read about this case in the New York Times today. It's important to really emphasize that the prosecutor investigating the case, who we see pictured there, says that there is no evidence so far of an anti-Semitic motive. This 31-year-old man, Jeremy Cohen, was hit by a tram back in February in a northern Paris suburb. A video emerged this week, though, on social media showing that he was hit while he was running away from a group of men who were beating him up. Now, that video did gain attention after it was shared by far-right candidate Eric Zemmour, who is Jewish and who has really built his campaign around wanting to, in his words, de-Islamize France. Now, as we read in French paper L'Opinion, the lack of clarity in this case really makes it ripe for political recuperation. The paper notes that it mixes public safety concerns, the suburbs, questions of anti-Semitism, doubts about the competency of investigators. And in recent days, it has drawn reaction from every single political candidate. L'Opinion and other French papers have actually been comparing it to a case that became known as the Papy Voise affair during the 2002 election. That's when an elderly man was attacked in a dangerous neighborhood, and it was seen as really giving a boost to the far right, which made it to the runoff in that election for the very first time. Still, L'Opinion notes, though, that it is hard to link any one event like this to a campaign outcome, and the paper is very clear that it's unclear what effect, if any effect at all, this case is ultimately going to have on the election.
Other campaign news now. The right-wing paper Le Figaro, they've published an interview with the far-right candidate Marine Le Pen.
This comes as polls are consistently showing her making it to the runoff against Emmanuel Macron, a repeat of 2017. Le Figaro asked her why she thinks she can win this time around, and she insists that her plans are legally and financially viable. She is, quote, ready to govern, as we see on their front page. Le Pen might be looking ahead to the next round, but as we read in Swiss paper Le Temps, there is another candidate that thinks he still has a chance of making it instead of her. That is, of course, Jean-Luc Mélenchon of the far left. Le Temps spoke to left-wing voters who said that they've ultimately decided to give up their first-choice candidates in favor of voting for Mélenchon, since they've kind of hopelessly decided that he really is the only left-wing candidate who seems to have a chance of making it to the next round. His campaign is really banking on that so-called useful vote to potentially send him through. Meanwhile, Stuart, others have noticed that Emmanuel Macron has been adopting rather leftist rhetoric in recent days. That's the idea of a cartoon by Coco in Libération today. It shows Macron in the style of the former socialist president, François Mitterrand, and he's saying, "Brigitte, these days I feel my soul is on the left. And she says, well, generally, that goes away after the first round.
Nicely put in the cartoon there. Finally, from Alison, if all this has just been too much and you think, that's enough, I want to get away, Alison has actually got the answer for you.
That's right. This is a job that I desperately wish I could apply for. It is to work at the post office in Antarctica. This comes from a British charity that is looking for several people to work at the post office gift shop. As we read in USA Today, perhaps the biggest perk of this job is that it also involves counting the very adorable penguins.
Three.
Yeah. Stuart, you're qualified. Well done. Well done for that photo. Hopefully there are more than just 3. Now, the job runs November of this year through March of next year, which is summer in the southern hemisphere. So the temperatures are pretty reasonable. It's about 10 degrees Celsius. There is limited power and no running water and no internet access, though, which could be a negative for some people. That's actually an upside for me, I'd say. Yeah. I was disappointed to read the fine print, though. You do need the right to work in the UK to apply, which means that I and probably many of our viewers are not eligible, but less competition for you, Stuart.
I'm eligible, and I've just been online ordering some thick socks. I'm not sure why, but if I disappear in November, you know why. I'll still be here, really. Alison, thanks a lot. Alison Sargent with the papers for you on France 24.